camp time at the University of Alabama, and since I work right over there in the stadium in the Digital Media Center for WVUA 23, I go through there, and I've seen them. Boy, it's wrapped up last week, and I'm sure that'll be the same just about the entire just about the entire month of June. I know these camps are important for a lot of reasons. Let me start off by asking you this. How much recruiting is done at these camps, actual recruiting in terms of the coaches making offers based on what they've seen during these camp evaluations?
Well, yeah, I think that happens a lot. I mean, that's a big part of it. I think is getting guys in here and evaluating them first hand, up close, personally, get a good look at them, and then there's a lot of offers that are made. There was a time when I remember the NCAA prohibited making the offers at the camps, but that rule changed. And I mean, it's just it's pretty prominent. I think an opportunity for these coaches to make those offers.
Give us some guys that are on the radar that you're keeping an eye out for at these camps this month during June. Some key guys that you think.
Well, I think it's really, to be honest with you, Gary, it's more about the guys who are visiting. To be honest, a lot of guys are taking part in camp. I think you get a good chance to see them and maybe make an offer like we talked about. And one guy would be Stephon Wright, like last week, the defensive lineman from Los Angeles Cathedral. He's a guy that came in, obviously a four-star player, so other schools have started to really recruit him. He visited here, actually, I think a couple of years ago. We had a piece on him then when he visited. He was just a sophomore in high school and, came in, had a good camp last week. Got an offer from Nick Saban. And, again, sometimes these offers aren't really committable,
right,
meaning that they can't make decisions right then. And, again, I'm not in a position to comment on what his offer status is, but they are obviously recruiting a lot of defensive linemen. Speaking of the visits, though, DeMarco Helms and Nick Cross are a couple of safety teammates from DeMatha Catholic High School up in Maryland. They had come in on a visit. I'm not sure they've left yet. I think they got in a little late. I know Helms got in yesterday. I think it was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, some weather issues. But, those two guys are both top 100 rated players. Nick Cross is a guy that's 6 feet, 205, 210. That Gary's one of the top 3 60-meter sprinters in the country. And so he's obviously got a lot of the physical tools you look for. And then DeMarco Helms is a really versatile player. He's another good-sized kid, 6'1", probably 210 pounds, a good-looking safety prospect with a lot of versatility, plays wide receiver as well. So both those guys, teammates, coming in for visits, and we'll see how that goes. And then this coming weekend, I know that they're expected to at least host a couple of guys, maybe more. Nakobe Dean, the number 1 inside linebacker in the country, according to the rating services out there from Horn Lake, Mississippi. Georgia's been really working him extra hard as well as, just about everybody else. But Alabama's been in pretty good position with him. And then also a great defensive line prospect out of Converse Judson, Texas, which is actually, the San Antonio area. DeMarvin is like I said, a fantastic defensive lineman. He's committed to Texas A&M right now. But, we'll see what happens.
Rodney, one more thing on the camps, and then I'm going to move on to a couple of other things. This Alabama series of camps, I know that they obviously reach out and want some key prospects, but I get the feeling just talking to I don't talk to nearly as many kids as you do with Tighter Insider, but I talk to them from time to time. You get the impression, though, that the kids around the country that are top prospects lobby their high school coaches, lobby their parents. It's a camp that everybody wants to come to, whether they're going to get an Alabama offer or not. The visibility of it, of course, if you get an Alabama offer, it seems to trigger offers from other schools. Do you get that sense when you talk to prospects that and I know there's a lot of different opportunities for them at camps around the country, but that Alabama's just pretty much at the top of almost everybody's list?
Yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to that, getting here, they want to see what it's all about. It's the name in college football. And, that's not a biased comment or I think that's pretty fair to say. I mean, it is the name. A kid may not necessarily have the intention of coming to Alabama, but certainly being able to experience it, to see it, and then maybe possibly get an offer from them, it opens up a lot of doors. There's been some kids that have gotten some offers, you know this, that have been not necessarily committable offers, but it's helped them skyrocket in terms of other schools giving them attention and making offers to them. So it's been helpful to a lot of kids, just the Alabama name, having that offer. And I think there are some kids that come here, to get an offer from Alabama, whether they ever intend on coming here or not.
Rodney, earlier in the first hour with Scott Moore was on, Corey called in, one of our listeners, and was talking about being concerned about motivation, pointing out that and Alabama has gone back-to-back. Now, they went back-to-back in 11 and 12, but the other times they've won the championship, they did not win it the next year. And I think he made some good points. At the same time, I use 2010 as an example because 2009, the climb to the top of the mountain was so difficult. 2008, they'd come up short. 2009, they got there. And I think Nick Saban did talk about, getting to the mountain's tough. Staying there is even harder. And that 2010 team, for all its talent, if there has been a disappointing team since the 2008 season, it's probably been that one. They lost 3 games. But I think a lot was learned there. I think that's even for Coach Saban as far as putting it in place that every team is different. You play to a standard. I just don't worry about motivation being an issue just because they won a championship the year before. Do you? I mean, I think this is a new team. You got new guys coming in. You got some guys who didn't play as bigger roles. And I don't think if they don't win the national championship has anything to do with not being motivated. You agree?
Yeah, I think it's always a battle. No matter who you are, when you win like that, you have to battle to certainly keep that focus. That it's obvious, Gary. There's a lot of hungry teams out there, and if you lose that edge, that focus, you can slip up real easily. So from that standpoint, I certainly understand. What he's talking about. Do I think this team will lack that motivation? I don't. They went through a lot last year. A lot of players were injured. They overcame a lot to win the national championship, which was actually incredible, the things that they had to manage through and overcome. I mean, if you looked at that team against Mississippi State that night, I would have said this team's probably not even going to be in the playoffs, much less win a national championship. So the things that they overcame to get there and do it were fantastic. I think it was a spark for the program. I think there's a lot of motivation. You have a lot of really talented young players. I think that's always a good thing because those guys are hungry. And I think some of the older players, like take a Terrell Lewis, for example, who was injured most of last year. Hey, this is a big year for him. This is a big year for guys like Anthony Jennings, Mack Wilson. Dylan Moses is ready to take that step up. Deontay Thompson has waited his turn. Savion Smith, the cornerback, transferred in here that's looking to make his mark. Trevon Diggs, how about that story? I mean, he's a guy that was a starter last year going into the year. Had a couple of problems against FSU, maybe missed a couple of assignments, lost his job. He's a guy that certainly wants to prove himself. I think there's a lot to prove, even though they won the national championship. You have a lot of stories, a lot of guys that are really, really hungry that I think want to improve themselves and should prove themselves and show themselves. So, from that standpoint, I think you're right, Gary. I think that this team will be motivated.
Bryant dealt with this during the 70s. There's no doubt about it. 60s, too, for that matter. Spurrier dealt with it at Florida. To some degree, Philip Fulmer got Tennessee at that point for a while. Not as long a period of time, but where you are the team and everybody's gunning for you. And granted, the goal for these teams is to get, win an SEC championship, get in the playoff. But first of all, they know they probably need to beat Alabama and have an opportunity to do that. Secondly, I think it is a season maker for teams. We saw it in 2012 for A&M. We saw it a couple years for Ole Miss. We saw it last year for Auburn. Beating Alabama makes your season. It makes it a success to some degree, regardless of what else happens. But I think when you're that team that's being gunned for, there's also a sense of pride that you take in that because that's where everybody wants to be. Everybody wants to be that team. And I think when and we've seen it before when Alabama goes on the road, when you can go into a place that's hostile and everything they're doing is designed to try to find a way to beat you, and you silence them, I just think there's a nasty sense of satisfaction that goes with that. And I think these Nick Saban teams have thrived off of that. Now, they haven't done it every time. We saw them lose at Auburn. Last year, we've seen them lose at Ole Miss. But for the most part, they go on the road, and they just take the life away from these teams. And I think they love it.
Yeah, and I think, too, the thing is we, you talked about the 70s, the late 70s. Obviously, they had the great run, 77, 78, 79, and then they started slipping a little bit. But I think, that was some, Coach Bryant started kind of maybe having some health issues, and things started kind of slipping a little bit. And then I think, you look at Nick Saban's just, when you look at some of the other, programs, he's just on a different level in terms of fighting complacency. He doesn't sit still. He doesn't sit around and say everything's okay. He could have done that last year, I think. Obviously some coaches moved on because they had other opportunities that were, would enhance their careers. But he doesn't sit around, Gary. He makes changes. There's not any complacency. He's always looking to make the next move that's going to better the program. I think that's what keeps it fresh. I think that's what helps keep them on top. And I think that's why, when you look at it, I was really wondering, last year as they were heading into those playoffs, exactly how after the playoffs Nick Saban would approach, kind of his coaching staff and some other things. And he didn't sit still. And I think that's always to me, that's always a great sign.
When you scan the SEC, when you take a look at the landscape of the conference, Georgia, I guess you could argue certainly that Kirby in 2 years has gotten them to where they wanted to go and why they hired him. He got them to a point that Rick never could, although Rick had great teams. I'm not saying that he didn't. You look at A&M investing all that money into Jimbo Fisher. Tennessee snags Jeremy Pruitt. Auburn's made a huge investment in Gus Malzahn. As we said, they're gunning for Alabama. That's the target. That's the standard. Yep. Mm-hmm. When you look at this year, and again, I know we're still a few months away, but I know you've already probably, you've just kind of taken a look around. Who do you think, whether it's East or West, is that? No, Georgia loses a lot. They do lose a lot from that team. Who's the team or couple of teams that you think are the biggest threats to Alabama not winning the SEC championship and not maybe making it into the playoff?
Well, obviously I think that, when you look at it, you start with Auburn. I mean, that's the arch rival. They're the team that beat Alabama this past year. They've lost some players, but they have the quarterback back. They have a good nucleus. Probably, maybe not the offensive line has some questions, but I think they feel like they've got a chance to have a great defense, especially up front. There's some people that say it's better than the group that Clemson had last year, which was pretty good. So Auburn's a team, certainly. Fortunately, they come over here. A lot of people are beating on Mississippi State's chest, to be honest with you. They've got the quarterback, Fitzgerald, at back. He's obviously really good. They think they're good, even though they have a coaching transition. They've got a good team. They come over here as well. And again, Gary, I think LSU's always talented. You have to go to Baton Rouge, where those games have been close. Mm-hmm. Every one of them, basically. You remember 2012, 2014. They won both those in dramatic fashion. 2016, they won 10-0. So that was a dogfight. So it's always a close game. We'll see. That could certainly be. And my guess is I look at it, Alabama's obviously an overwhelming favorite to win the West and go to the SEC championship game, in my opinion. I mean, some people may think that's a little, exaggerated, but, and then you get there and you have to think that Georgia would be the favorite in the East. So, we'll see from there.
Schematically, Saban has shown a great ability to evolve, Rodney. You and I have discussed it. I mean, you look back at those 2008, 2009 teams, man, it was pretty much old-fashioned smash-mouth football. I mean, they just said, kind of like he did at LSU. I mean, the theory was we're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, and we're going to win the game because if you can't play us on the line of scrimmage, and teams, to their credit, have found a way to tweak things, and we get the spread, and we saw that Auburn was supposed to be the kryptonite. Gus Malzahn in 2013 with a kick six. We've seen Saban adjust. With Tua, ability to throw the football, we've seen Saban adapt to what Jalen did well. New coordinators this year. Dan Enos coming in as a quarterback's coach, which is a new dynamic to have a coordinator and a quarterback's coach. I know I'm putting you on your spot a little bit, but just your thoughts on tweaking this team and making it different from last year's team or the team before that. What do you think we could see? Let's start offensively. What do you think we could see differently if Tua's the quarterback? Is it throwing the football more? Maybe will they throw it more than they run it? How do you continue to be physical if you're throwing it up, a bunch of times? Offensively, what do you think the tweaks will be?
Well, I think first of all, I think when Coker, the year he played, the starter in 2015, well, we know Blake Sims threw the ball quite a bit. He threw for 3,487 yards, 28 touchdowns.
He sure did.
Coker threw for over 3,000. He averaged 32 attempts a game. I think that was down considerably last year. I'm not really sure exactly what the number of attempts were for Jalen Hurts, but it was down, 8 or 9 a game from what Coker hit in 2015, I think, at least maybe even 10 a game. But so they vary depending, like you said, on the strengths of the guys that they have in those positions. And you look at them right now, I mean, obviously, I think they've got a chance to have a really good offensive line that's going to be good in terms of the run blocking. I think, too, personally, and I said it last week on TiderInsider.com, it's just my opinion. It's just an opinion. It's just a thought. I'm not saying this is what it's going to be. But I think Tua will be the starting quarterback. I think he does give you more diversity. He allows you to utilize your weapons outside more in greater ways. He can really attack all parts of the field. So, again, with that in mind, I think that certainly helps everybody, the offensive line. I think it opens up running lanes. I think with these running backs that they have, you can envision things that they could do offensively in that running game. They'll be hard to stop. And with that said, regardless of who the quarterback is, I do think that the running game could be strong anyway, because I do think the offensive line is going to be, good enough, and those backs are going to be great. And they've got some, good tight ends. I really like their core of tight ends, and I think, obviously Irv Smith, Hell Hinches, both those guys have been around. I think there's a young guy, Kedrick James, that is going to be a blossoming star, and we may see him more this year, sophomore out of Texas, so I'd keep an eye out for him. But so I think, Gary, I do still think that the foundation will be, running the football, but I think with a quarterback with, Tua's ability to spread the field, utilize all those great weapons that they have at wide receiver and also tight end in the receiving game, got a passing game. I think it's got a chance to be a really diverse offense.
And defensively, I mean, the last couple of years, 2016 and 2017, this team got after the quarterback pretty well. And Pruitt was aggressive, maybe a little more aggressive than Kirby in terms of trying to get after the quarterback. But now Tosh is in charge, and I know Coach Saban is going to be hand in hand with him defensively. But knowing Tosh a little bit, watching him work at practice, looking at his recruiting tendencies, you just get the feeling, Rodney, that he wants to affect the quarterback every snap. And they've got some guys they've brought in here who have potential to be dynamic pass rushers. Do you think we'll even see more emphasis on harassing the quarterback, maybe at times leaving your back end a little vulnerable, but with the thought that, if the guy can't get the ball out of his hand, it doesn't matter, if there's a chance to make a big play or not. Also with the fact that secondary may be a little bit young. Do you think we'll see even more emphasis on harassing and trying to sack the quarterback?
I just think that they're probably going to have more ability to do that, and just all across the front. Raekwon Davis, Isaiah Buggs, Quentin Williams, Brian Ray's a young guy on the defensive line. There are others. I think then you've got Terrell Lewis, who has a chance to be very dynamic pass rusher and player in general. That he plays that outside linebacker, but he puts his hand down, plays a lot like a defensive end almost. And then they have Anthony Jennings coming back, who was he dominated the Clemson game. Now I didn't think those Clemson offensive tackles, they probably weren't as good as people thought they were, but he dominated that game before his injury, and I understand his rehab's gone well, and he's expected to be ready to go. So that's good. Obviously, Christian Miller's back. He's got a tremendous amount of pass rushing ability. I think a young guy that really has a lot of natural ability as a pass rusher is Chris Allen, sophomore out of Baton Rouge. I think eventually he's a guy that just had to learn to make the adjustment. I'm sure it's still making the adjustments to this level, the responsibilities, the assignments that you have, Gary, that, you can't lose containment, chase a play from the backside and somebody, run a reverse on you, whatever it is. I just think that's been his deal, is learning what he's supposed to do. But I think he's fantastic. And I even think, look, how about Dylan Moses and Mac Wilson? You can line those guys up just about anywhere. I mean, when you look at them, they look like NFL inside backers right now. I'm just talking physically, and obviously they've shown a lot of flashes, and I thought Mac had a great end of last year. But even if you put them on the edge, they've been very, very effective as pass rushers. So they've just got so many guys up front that I think they have a chance to really – they could make it miserable, I think, for opposing quarterbacks trying to throw the football.
Okay, we're over, but I want to ask you one more question, prospect specific, and then I'll let you go. This offensive line class could turn out to be epic, best in the country, one of the best in Bama history. It looks like defensive line class could be strong too. Clay Webb, though, the center from Oxford, who I think is as good a center prospect as we've seen come out in a long, long time. I thought a few months ago that he might have already been on board by now, but he isn't. The longer this goes, is there concern for Alabama ultimately that he might, go to Auburn or Georgia or somewhere else?
I think he's always planned to go make his announcement in December. He wanted to wait to the end before he makes his decision. But I think right now, Gary, I think Alabama's a very, very strong leader with Clay Webb. But again, it's recruiting, and those other schools you mentioned, Auburn, Georgia, certainly are in the mix.
You can find Rodney at TiderInsider.com, all the latest recruiting information and more. And, of course, on Tuesday nights, including tomorrow night with me on Tider Insider TV at 6:30 on WVUA 23. Thanks a lot, Rodney.
Okay, bud. Take care.